IOSH Networks Audio.
And I'd like to introduce you to Gerard Hand, who's a company director with a company called GPH Safety. Gerard is going to give us a paper titled A Sensible and Pragmatic Risk Assessment.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you ever so much for inviting me here to your conference in Ireland. When I got invited, I asked what the title was, and they said, Clueless or Competent. Now, I'm not sure which category I fall into when I got the invite. Am I clueless or am I competent? Well, I like to think I'm competent. However, that wasn't always the case, because I think in my early days of health and safety, I was probably quite clueless. Not knowingly, not deliberately, but unfortunately that was the reality. I'm talking today about sensible risk management, the pragmatic approach, but what does that actually mean? Well, it's very funny. When I was at school, I've got to be completely honest with you, this isn't what I dreamt of doing. I know that comes as a surprise to most people, because most people would have thought when you're at school, you just dream of being a health and safety consultant. Sadly not. When I was at school, all I wanted to do was play rugby league. I come from a place called Halifax in Yorkshire, the one that had the big building society. And it's a rugby league mad town. And when I was at school, that's all we did. And at the age of 11, I was picked out as a young lad that was quite good at the game. The reason for that was very simple. I was taller than other 11-year-old kids at the time. I was also broader, not fatter. That came later on in life. So the rules was very simple. Give the big lad the ball and nobody will ever stop him. And it was a very successful way of playing the game. By the age of 15, I was playing for Halifax Rugby League first team reserves and training with the full first team squad. So things was looking fairly good. My life was mapped out. I'm going to be playing at Wembley. At the age of 15 and a half, after a Wednesday night training session, the first team coach came to me and he said, "Now then, lad," he was also from Yorkshire, "what is it you want to do with your life?" I said, "All I've ever wanted to do is play for the first team for Halifax." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, bad news, lad. There's not good enough. I don't want you back next week." That was the end of my rugby league career. You can say, "Oh," if you want. It's a sad story. Thank you. I always remember going home to my parents and saying what had happened. My dad was very supportive. He says, "I told you so." Because from the age of 11, he'd be telling me exactly what would happen. He says, "What are you going to do now, son?" So I said, "I think I'll stay on at school, Dad." He says, "Excellent. What A-levels are you going to take?" I said, "Well, I was thinking about doing my O-levels again, because I had this suspicion that although I went to school, maybe I didn't put in as much effort as I should." So I said, "Yeah, I think I'll be doing retakes." And my dad says, "Son, I'm happy for you to stay on at school to further educate, but not to do things that you should have already done." So it was quite simple. Pass your exams, you stay on. Fail your exams, you leave school. So at 16, I left school. Gives you an idea how the exams went, pretty much as predicted. That meant I now had to get something called a job. Now, I'd heard of the word, didn't know a great deal about it, but apparently I needed to get this in order to pay board to my mum and dad. Yeah, I went to the job centre and they were advertising for a new company that was coming to Halifax. This new company was called Sainsbury's. They were a London-based supermarket that was starting to move up north and educate people into quality food. They were advertising for trolley collectors for their new store. Now, with my academic ability and physical prowess, I thought, I can do that job. The real big selling point, however, was it was going to pay £36 a week. Now, youth opportunity schemes, which were around at the time, only paid 27, so we're talking big money league if I can get this job. I went for the interview and I got offered the job. I am now a trolley collector for the new Sainsbury's in Halifax. Now, the new store wasn't opening up for 3 months, so they sent me out to Sainsbury's in Bradford to train. Now, I'm not saying I'm smart, but 3 months training on trolleys. By day 1, I'd sussed it. By day 2, I'd not only sussed it, I decided I was ready to go for the world record as to how many trolleys I could push up the car park slope at Sainsbury's in Bradford. The current world record apparently stood at 49 trolleys. I decided to go for 52. If you're going to get a record, get a proper one. Now, anybody that's been shopping, you imagine 52 trolleys nestled together. That's a hell of a row. My job was to get them from the bottom of the car park to the top. This is where I discovered a little bit about health and safety. Yeah? First one was manual handling. It took a hell of a lot of physical effort to get them moving. But once I got them moving, I started gaining a bit of momentum. Yeah? And I started getting closer to the jackpot. I got within about 6 foot of breaking the world record, then tragedy struck. 5 trolleys rolled off the end. Now, mathematically speaking, that meant I still had hold of 47. The 5 that had rolled off now started to separate, rolled down the car park slope and gained speed as they went. That's when I discovered prayer. I prayed for 2 things. First of all, one of these trolleys wouldn't hit a customer and kill them. Secondly, one wouldn't go into somebody's car. First prayer was answered. Second prayer, not so lucky. One went straight into the side of somebody's BMW. I'm on the second day of working for a new company as a 16-year-old, and I've just smashed up somebody's BMW. Now, the guy got out of his car, and although I played rugby league, I can honestly say he taught me some new words. He then went to my manager. He told my manager what had happened, and she came out, and she... Is anybody from a HR background? Yeah, OK, it's a counselling session. That wasn't the word that was used at the time. Yeah, I got the counselling session of my life. And it was all to do with the fact that I didn't follow the procedure. Now, when she said this to me, I thought, what is she talking about? And she said, yesterday on your induction, you went through all of the procedures correct, so I nodded. It seemed like the right thing to do. She then said, so how many trolleys are you allowed to push? Now, I had a hunch the answer wasn't going to be 52 or more, purely gauged on the reaction. So I said, I think it's 40. She looked at me and she said, I think it's not. But because of the way she said it, I thought it's lower. I said, is it 30? And she went, no. 20. She said, you don't know, do you? I said, I can't remember. She then got this huge manual, about 1,100 pages in it. She went to page 740 and she said, what does that say? Thou shalt not push more than 8 trolleys at any one time, and they shall be tied together using the strap provided. She then said, have you seen that? I says, I don't think so. She then went to the back and there it was. My signature to say I have read and understood all the aforementioned procedures. Now, that told me quite a lot about health and safety at a very early stage. It told me the time you are most likely to find out about it is when it's gone wrong. So now I've had a written warning, day 2. I go back out. Would you start following the procedure? It seems like a good idea. So I start pushing 8 trolleys. When you've tried 52, 8's an absolute doddle. I'm walking up and down, whistling even at one stage. It was so good. After 15 minutes, however, the good times run out. Because all the empty trolleys that were in the bay had also run out, and there was 12 customers waiting for my 8 trolleys. Now, anybody that goes shopping, it's bad enough having to shop, but to have to wait for a trolley and delay it even further, that's not good. So these customers complained to my manager. Counselling session number 2. Yeah. My job is to keep the customers supplied with trolleys. And I looked at the manager and I says, I'm trying really hard, I'm running, look, I'm sweating. I can't go any faster. I said, if I can only push 8 trolleys, you need another 3 people out here. And she looked at me and said, well, there isn't 3 people, there's only you, do the best you can. What does do the best you can mean? You're allowed to talk, it makes it go a hell of a lot quicker if you do. What does it mean, do the best you can? Well, what it meant to me was, you're going to have to push more than 8 trolleys. And let's hope nothing goes wrong. Yeah? So I said, well, why can't you let me push 20? Because physically, 20 was well within my capabilities. She said, well, the procedure's 8. So, well, where do these procedures come from? Can't we change them? She said, well, that'll be the Health and Safety Department at Blackfriars in London. I then asked a question to some extent, changed my career path completely in life. I said, have they ever pushed trolleys? And she said, well, I wouldn't have thought so. They're health and safety. So I said, well, how can people that have never done the job write the rules for the people that are doing it? And she didn't have an answer. So she said, I'll tell you what, go and speak to the store manager and tell the store manager what's happened and what you've just said to me. Now, when you're 16 working in a supermarket, the store manager is a bloke called God. I've now got a visitation with God, and I'm telling God all about my predicament with my trolleys. And at the end of it, God looked at me and he said, young man, that's a very good point you've raised. I've got a district managers meeting coming up in 2 weeks. I want you to come along in front of all the managers and tell them what you've just said to me. Now there's gods all over the place, plus God's boss. And I'm there talking about my problem with the trolleys. But it made sense to what I'd class as normal people. They understood that what they were actually trying to do wasn't enforceable. Because if they'd have had to get 3 extra people, there was a huge cost to that. And that cost would have been multiplied by the 500 stores that there was. Therefore, money does actually come into health and safety. Because if we're coming up with a control measure There may well be a cost to it. And that's where the word reasonable comes in. We have to make sure it's sensible, it's proportionate. We have to ensure that the advice we're giving is competent. Now, the story goes, and I did lots of different jobs with Sainsbury's, and about 7 years after that, I actually got appointed as the Retail Field Health, Safety and Fire Manager with them. That's how I got involved in health and safety. This is a massive job, senior manager with a blue-chip company at a relatively young age. Now, I got there by default. I wasn't really qualified, but I had a little bit of an understanding with it. And as my first day as a senior manager, you got to meet the board of directors. Now, I knew I was in the boardroom because the first thing that hit you was the cigar smoke. The second thing was how far your foot sunk into the shag pile carpets. It was all oak panelled wood, and all the directors were sat on big leather chairs. I got the little chair at the end. Lord John Sainsbury's was the chairman at the time. He stood up and he says, "Congratulations on your appointment, young man. Your job is very simple. Your job is to keep us out of prison." And I thought, what a wonderful job that is. I said, "Would you have any advice on how I go about doing that?" He says, "Well, it's very simple. We look after our staff, we don't injure them. We look after our customer and visitors, we don't injure them. We don't go to prison." And actually, it was the first time I'd really heard somebody talk about health and safety in the context of looking after people. You know, I think it was mentioned earlier on about being proud of what we do. Well, we should be proud of what we do. If we're there to try and look after people's health, safety and welfare, that's a great career to be in. Now, because I wasn't qualified, I decided to go on lots and lots of training courses. Some I managed to stay awake until lunchtime on, some I couldn't quite succeed. And the reason that I struggled was because whenever they spoke about risk assessment, they kept saying, and you need to identify worst-case scenario. So you've come across that before, presumably. Yep. And I struggled with that because I'm thinking, worst-case scenario. Just borrow this. What's this?